They called security on her before she even said a word. No warning, no explanation, just 2 officers summoned like backup, walking straight toward a black woman standing in line with a first-class boarding pass in her hand. The gate agent didn't even glance at the ticket. Didn't need to. "Ma'am, step aside." That was all, 4 words spoken with the kind of finality reserved for trespassers, not travelers. And as she was quietly pulled from the queue, eyes followed, but not in protest, just in confirmation. Because to them, she didn't look like someone who belonged in seat 1A. Not with that skin, not with that silence, not with that calm. But here's the part no one knew, not the flight staff. Not the supervisor grinning smugly by the kiosk, and certainly not the man who walked through after her, without so much as a glance at his ID. The woman they just tried to remove didn't buy the ticket to first class. She bought something else, something bigger, and when you find out what it is, you'll understand why no one on that flight ever flew the same again. This isn't a story about race. This is a story about power. The kind you never see coming. The kind they didn't see standing right in front of them. So now, ask yourself, what happens when the person you try to silence turns out to own the silence itself? Who is she? Why didn't she fight back? And what did she come here to do? Drop your theories in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from. And if you believe justice doesn't always come in loud voices, hit that subscribe button. You'll want to be here when the truth lands. The sun hadn't fully risen over the city skyline when Naomi Carter arrived at the terminal. It was 5:43 a.m. Oh, early even by airport standards. But the line for priority access was already forming. Autumn stood slightly apart from it, not because she didn't belong, but because she had learned long ago that proximity often invited scrutiny. She wore a navy blue hoodie, simple jeans, and sneakers that had seen better days. Her hair was pulled back in a low bun, and she carried nothing but a canvas tote bag slung over her shoulder. No roller bag, no designer luggage, just her and the quiet resolve of someone who had traveled alone many times, for reasons far more important than a vacation. As she approached the priority access queue, a slim, well-dressed employee at the head of the line eyed her with a flicker of hesitation. His name tag read Ryan, and though he wore the practiced smile of customer service, his eyebrows tightened the moment Autumn stepped forward. "Hi there," he said, tilting his head slightly. "This lane is for executive and first-class travelers." His tone was polite, but there was a current beneath it, one of assumption. Autumn didn't flinch. She simply held up her digital boarding pass. "I know," she said, her voice even. Ryan's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but he recovered quickly and scanned the code on her phone. Behind Autumn, a middle-aged man in a blazer and Bluetooth headset sighed impatiently. Ryan glanced over her shoulder at the man, then back at Autumn, suddenly feeling the pressure to move things along. He tapped a few buttons on his screen, then gave her a smile that barely reached his eyes. "Right, you're in. Okay, proceed, ma'am." But as she moved forward, Ryan leaned over to the colleague beside him and whispered, just loud enough for her to hear, "Thought she was lost." The other employee gave a short, amused laugh. Autumn kept walking. At security, things didn't improve. Though her boarding pass clearly showed TSA pre-check clearance, she was pulled aside. "Random check," the agent mumbled, motioning her toward a separate table. Her tote was opened, contents sifted through travel-size toiletries, a book, a sealed envelope, and a single folder with a red string clasp. The agent paused on the envelope. "What's this? Legal documents?" Autumn said calmly. "Private?" You a lawyer or something? He asked, flipping it over. Not exactly, she replied. After a moment, the agent shrugged and waved her through. In the background, the line moved smoothly for others, men in suits, couples with designer luggage, an elderly woman with a diamond necklace that caught the overhead lights. Autumn noticed the pattern, but didn't react. She'd grown used to it. The way the system searched harder when you didn't look the part. The way assumptions trailed you like shadows in fluorescent light. She reached the gate with time to spare, gate C9 according to the screen, and took a seat in the corner of the waiting area. She didn't check her phone, didn't scroll or call or text. Instead, she placed the tote beside her, pulled out the sealed envelope, and rested it on her lap. It was heavy, metaphorically speaking. Inside it, the details of a financial transfer that had the potential to alter the future of one of the biggest airline mergers in North America. She didn't look the part, but she was the deciding vote. A child in a stroller nearby stared at her. Autumn offered a small smile. The child's mother glanced up, caught her gaze, and quickly turned the stroller in the opposite direction. Autumn exhaled slowly and leaned back in the chair. The speaker above her crackled. Final boarding for Flight 237 to Boston. All remaining passengers, please proceed to gate C12. She watched the gate agent handling that flight. The way she smiled easily at the man with the briefcase. The way she waved through the woman with a golden retriever in a carrier bag. Politeness came in tears here, like the seating arrangements. She knew she was at the bottom of the invisible hierarchy. But that didn't bother her. She wasn't here to be comfortable. She was here to observe, to test, to confirm a suspicion. It had been 3 years since she'd received the letter, a trust fund with a clause. Her approval was required before the next phase of investment in a major transportation company could be finalized. But the law firm overseeing the process had made an odd request. They wanted her to fly one of the routes in person, incognito. See how they treat you, the managing partner had said. See what they're like when they think you're nobody. And so, here she was. A boarding announcement broke her train of thought. Now boarding Group 1 for Flight 1187 to Denver. First class and executive platinum. Please approach the gate. Autumn stood and walked calmly toward the line. A man 2 places ahead glanced at her, then back at the gate agent as if seeking confirmation that she belonged there. When it was her turn, the agent barely looked up. Ma'am, boarding is for first and executive platinum only. Autumn showed her pass again. Sat 2A, she said quietly. The agent blinked, scanned it, and forced a smile. Go ahead. As she stepped onto the jet bridge, she felt the heat of multiple eyes on her back. She didn't look like first class. She didn't act like she needed it. And that was the point. She reached her seat and sat down slowly, placing the envelope gently in the seat pocket in front of her. The man in 2B gave her a polite nod, then returned to his email. The overhead bins slammed shut. The engine hum began, and Autumn, for the first time that morning, allowed herself a small breath of control. Let them keep watching, she thought. They have no idea what this flight really means. The hum of the aircraft deepened as the boarding door closed with a dull finality, sealing in the hierarchy that had been carefully constructed in the space between seat numbers. Autumn sat near the window, her tote tucked carefully beneath the seat in front of her, and the sealed envelope resting flat across her lap like an anchor. The man beside her, dressed in a heather gray sports coat and designer glasses, offered a faint smile without speaking, then resumed tapping at his tablet, clearly preoccupied. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the flight attendants moved briskly through the aisle, closing bins and counting heads, their eyes skimming over Autumn like she was an unverified barcode in a sea of premium purchases. One of them, a woman with a sleek bun and a name tag that read Sloan, paused just briefly when she reached row 2, scanning both seats. Her expression was neutral but not warm. Her smile, practiced but not given freely. "Good morning," she said, with a tone that didn't rise. Autumn responded with a polite nod, receiving none in return. A minute later, the cabin supervisor stepped through the aisle with a clipboard, pausing just long enough beside their row to whisper something to Sloan. Both glanced at Autumn before continuing toward the cockpit. As the plane began to taxi, Autumn felt the subtle shift in attitude, not overt, not dramatic, but unmistakably intentional. A bottle of water was handed out to passengers in row 1, then row 3. Row 2 was skipped. Sloan passed her twice, each time offering items to other passengers but never looking directly at her. Autumn kept her gaze on the window, her fingers gently brushing the edge of the envelope, but she registered every move. In a world built on control, power often lived in the smallest decisions. And right now, someone had decided to make her invisible. When the beverage cart rolled down the aisle after takeoff, Sloan stood stiffly by as the junior attendant asked Autumn what she'd like to drink. "Just water," Autumn replied. The attendant looked hesitant, then leaned toward Sloan and whispered something. Sloan whispered back, then turned to Autumn with a thin smile. "Unfortunately, ma'am, complimentary beverage service isn't included in your class of ticket," she said. Autumn raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. "Even for first class?" she asked calmly. Sloan blinked, glanced down at her manifest, then hesitated. "I'll check with the cabin manager," she said shortly, and moved on without another word. The man in 2B shot her a confused look. "I thought drinks were included in first," he asked, to no one in particular. Autumn didn't answer. A few rows up, a baby began to fuss. The sound was soft at first, but quickly became a full wail. The flight attendant offered the mother a warm smile, brought a blanket, then offered to heat milk. The contrast stung, not because Autumn expected to be coddled, but because the script of hospitality was being edited in real time to exclude her. Moments later, another flight attendant returned with a warm cloth and offered it to her seatmate, asking if he needed anything else. He declined. Autumn was not addressed. She remained still, fingers resting on the envelope, the weight of the paper heavier now. She didn't know all the players behind this flight, only the structures. But already, she recognized the pattern. Power tested people not when they were loud, but when they were quiet. And right now, she was failing to make noise. Or so they thought. About halfway through the flight, the lead cabin manager, a tall man named David, stopped at her row, knelt slightly, and asked for her boarding pass. "We've had a seating issue," reported from ground crew. He said without preamble. "Would you mind if I rescan your credentials?" Autumn held up her phone, unlocking it with a touch and showing the boarding pass once more. David stared at it for a few seconds longer than necessary. Then, with a strange look, he said, "Strange. It must have been a sync error. I'll make a note." No apology, no clarification, just a vague suggestion of some invisible glitch that somehow justified singling her out. When he stood and walked away, Sloan returned seconds later, kneeling down with an overly bright smile. "We've adjusted your record, ma'am," she said, as if the record had ever been the problem. Then she added in a quieter tone, Let us know if you need anything." But Autumn didn't respond. She glanced out the window instead, watching the clouds split and rejoin like cells under a microscope. She had flown this route before, years ago, back when she was still a teenager, traveling for the first time to attend a funeral across the country. That trip had changed her life. It was the moment she learned the world didn't hand you respect. It waited to see how much you'd endure before it considered you worthy. And sometimes, even then, it decided against you. The memory lingered now, like vapor. Just as the seatbelt light pinged on again, Sloane returned to Autumn's row and crouched slightly beside her. "Apologies," she said in a rehearsed tone. "It seems your seat assignment may have been changed during boarding. Would you mind moving to 17D? We've had a request to rearrange for weight balance." Autumn turned toward her with a measured look. "Weight balance," she repeated. "That's the explanation." Sloane nodded, her smile tightening. "Yes, ma'am. Just protocol." Autumn looked at her calmly, said nothing, then leaned back in her seat. "I'll stay where I am." The smile froze on Sloane's lips. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, the intercom crackled again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're expecting mild turbulence. Please remain seated and keep your seatbelts fastened." Autumn exhaled slowly. No further attempt to relocate her was made. The turbulence never came. Time stretched. People napped, typed, whispered. Autumn stayed silent, unmoving, the envelope untouched. The real turbulence, she knew, was only just beginning. And when it arrived, it wouldn't come from the sky. It would come from the ground they thought they stood on. The hum of the cabin settled into a mechanical rhythm, the kind of background noise most passengers tuned out as they slipped into naps, soft movies, or overpriced audiobooks. But Naomi Carter wasn't tuning out. She was cataloging. Every word, every glance, every selectively skipped offer of service was quietly stacked into a mental archive that she'd learned to build ever since she was old enough to notice the difference between being seen and being served. The silence was never empty. It was full of decisions. And the ones happening around her weren't accidents. They were rehearsed, calculated, and worse. They were comfortable for the people performing them. Sloane returned again, this time with warm towels in a silver tray, offering them with a pleasant, "Here you go," to rows 1, 3, and even 4 behind her. Autumn's row skipped. No explanation, no acknowledgement, not even eye contact. The man beside her had long since buried himself in his work, perhaps too uncomfortable to notice or too used to the fact that comfort, like this, often came at someone else's expense. Autumn didn't ask for the towel. She never did. She just sat quietly, staring at the tray as it passed her again, like a ghost ignoring the living. 20 minutes later, the scent of warming bread filled the cabin. First-class meal service had begun. Metal carts clicked and slid between rows, draped in cloths to make them look elegant, though Autumn knew it was still the same process behind the scene's warm plate. Serve, remove. Sloane reappeared now, with a menu and a forced smile. She stopped at 2B, presented the options with a flourish, and wrote something neatly onto her pad. Then she stepped past Autumn as if she were a spare coat hanging on the armrest. The cart rolled forward. No menu, no question. Autumn waited, counted 3 rows served before she cleared her throat gently. Sloane turned her head but didn't approach. "Was I skipped for meal service?" Autumn asked, her voice low and steady. Sloane walked back with mechanical patience. "Oh, I wasn't sure you were eligible," she said with a slight laugh, the kind that carried condescension, cloaked in fake charm. "Sometimes these assignments get complicated." Autumn tilted her head. "I'm into it." Her tone didn't rise, but her eyes were sharp. "There's nothing complicated about that." Sloane hesitated, then checked the manifest again, this time more visibly, like she needed to perform the act of verification for her own self-assurance. "Right," she said, nodding quickly. "Would you like the herb-roasted chicken or the miso-glazed cod?" Autumn chose the cod, without looking at her. "Coming right up," Sloane said with brittle cheer and disappeared again. When the tray arrived, 15 minutes later, it came cold. The fish, barely warmed through, the vegetables limp, the rice sticky in a way that wasn't intentional. Autumn didn't touch it. She placed the lid back over the plate, pushed the tray forward an inch, and returned to her envelope. Still untouched, but somehow heavier with every passing hour. Across the aisle, another passenger called for a refill. A steward appeared instantly. Autumn watched the interaction unfold, a perfect model of attention and service. She didn't envy it, she measured it. That was the difference. At 33, she had long since stopped wanting to be accepted. What she wanted now was to test what people did when they thought they didn't have to pretend. Then came the moment that sealed the tone of the cabin. A man, maybe late 50s, khaki pants and expensive headphones, walked down from row 5 and leaned on Autumn's seat as if it were public property. "Hey," he said to Sloane, loud enough for others to hear. "She's in first." He didn't even look at Autumn as he said it. She didn't turn. She didn't need to. The question wasn't meant for her. It was meant to be a statement in the form of a question. Sloane laughed quietly, but not quietly enough. "She's on the list," she replied, brushing past the man. "Must be a points redemption or something." The man chuckled, slapped the seat twice, and returned to his row. Autumn didn't move. Her heart didn't race, but her fingers curled slightly tighter around the corner of the envelope. If she had spoken right then, she wasn't sure it would have come out calm, and she needed calm for what came next. Later, during cabin cleanup, a different attendant came by. A younger man, clearly newer, less polished. He reached for Autumn's tray and paused. "Didn't like the fish?" he asked, almost sheepish. Autumn gave him a polite but unreadable look. It was cold. He nodded, muttered something that sounded like sorry, and rolled the card away. A few seconds later, she saw him whisper something to Sloane, who immediately shot a glance back toward row 2 with a look that wasn't guilt, but irritation. Autumn caught it. Sloane didn't smile again for the rest of the flight. The captain's voice eventually came over the speaker, announcing descent. Most passengers were half asleep or tucked into their headphones, but Autumn remained alert. She didn't trust ease, especially not here. Sloane passed by one last time, checking seatbelts, and when she stopped at row 2, she glanced at Autumn's tote on the floor. "Just a reminder," she said flatly. "All personal items should be stored overhead during landing." Autumn looked at her evenly. "I've flown before." Sloane didn't respond. She moved on, as the wheels touched down and the cabin jolted softly. Autumn's hand moved to the envelope again. The moment was drawing close. She hadn't said much. She hadn't needed to. But everything they'd done, every skipped towel, every passive-aggressive rule bend, every glance and whisper, had already spoken loud enough for her. And as the plane taxied toward Gate 32, she felt it again. Not anger, not fear, just the cold, deliberate click of confirmation. She waited for the fastened seatbelt light to blink off before reaching into her tote and pulling out not just the envelope. But Autumn didn't rush. As passengers began gathering their belongings and shuffling into the aisle, bumping one another with laptop bags and duty-free perfume sacks, she remained seated. She slid the envelope into her lap with the same care one might handle a fragile antique. The seal was still unbroken, the red wax emblem gleaming faintly under the dim cabin light. A small movement caught her attention. Sloane, standing near the front of the cabin, watching her without pretending otherwise. There was no more veil of customer service. Now the flight was over. The show ended, and all that remained was the lingering tension of a power dynamic that had yet to fully reveal itself. Autumn waited until the aisle cleared slightly before she stood, her canvas tote over one shoulder, the envelope in hand. She walked slowly, intentionally, to the threshold of the aircraft. The captain had stepped out, standard protocol for first-class deplaning. He was smiling at the other passengers, thanking them, nodding politely. When Autumn reached the doorway, his smile faded slightly. "Safe travels," he said, with a pause. Autumn nodded, but didn't return the pleasantry. She stepped into the jet bridge, the cool air greeting her like a transition cue. Halfway down the corridor, a uniformed airport agent stepped into her path. "Miss Riley?" he asked, clipboard in hand, earpiece snug. Autumn didn't blink. "Yes," she replied. The man gave a polite nod. "We've had a request to verify your final destination before releasing your luggage. Just a routine update." Autumn's lips twitched, not into a smile, but something resembling disbelief. "You need to verify where I'm going," she repeated. The agent glanced down at his clipboard. "Yes, ma'am. It seems there was a reclassification in your reservation. You were listed under a flag status code 19B. Internal override required." Autumn took a small step forward. "Who filed that code?" she asked, her voice sharp now, each syllable landing with clarity. The agent hesitated. "It doesn't say, might have been auto-generated." "It wasn't," she said flatly. "Take me to whoever's handling this." The agent shifted uncomfortably, then motioned toward a side hallway off the main concourse. "This way, ma'am." She followed him down a narrow corridor lined with storage doors and industrial carpeting, the sterile smell of overused disinfectant in the air. At the end, a small room marked Operations Holding 3B stood open. Inside, a desk with 2 screens, a printer, and a woman in a black blazer greeted her without standing. Her name tag read, Ground Liaison Supervisor. She didn't smile. "Ms. Riley," she said crisply, "we've encountered an anomaly with your record. It appears your seat was reassigned mid-flight due to an internal review. The system flagged your reservation as irregular, possibly an accidental upgrade." Autumn placed the envelope down on the desk gently, not opening it yet. "Irregular how?" she asked. Turner tapped on her keyboard. "It says the ticket originated from a legacy voucher source tied to a retired loyalty program no longer recognized by our current system." Autumn raised an eyebrow. "So your system no longer recognizes its own assets?" Turner paused. "Legacy programs can sometimes be manipulated. Fraudulent resellers have been an issue." Autumn remained still, absorbing the weight of the accusation wrapped in professional phrasing. "You're implying that I fraudulently boarded a seat I paid for?" Turner straightened her back slightly. "We're not accusing you of anything, ma'am. We're simply protecting our operational integrity." Autumn stared at her for a long moment, then reached into her tote bag and pulled out a black leather wallet. She slid out a slim card and placed it next to the envelope. It was platinum embossed and bore a serial number not for banking, but identification. Turner stared at it, blinked, then looked up. "I'm sorry. What exactly is this?" "It's access authorization," Autumn replied. "Level 4 clearance under Eason Financial Holdings." The agent beside her stiffened. Turner frowned. "That's an equity firm." "No," Autumn said calmly, opening the envelope and pulling out a single-page document with letterhead so finely printed it shimmered. "It's the parent institution that owns 41% of your airlines, pending merger shares." She held the document up, letting Turner see the seal, the signatures, the dates. "This is a binding disclosure agreement. I'm the listed witness and final signature before compliance release." The room shifted, not physically, but energetically, the way tension does when someone realizes the person they were trying to dismiss is the one holding the gate key. Turner's mouth opened slightly. "I was informed." "Of course not," Autumn cut in, "because this flight was never about public disclosure. It was a real-world test. Anonymous engagement from the only person authorized to validate the trust release clause. I'm here as a verifier, not a VIP." Silence stretched. The operations agent shifted his weight, clearly reevaluating everything that had just occurred over the last 6 hours. Turner straightened her back again, this time out of formality, not power. "Ms. Riley, we'd like to offer—" "No," Autumn interrupted. "You'll not offer anything. You'll report everything." She turned toward the agent. "Where's my bag?" He stammered. "In holding bay D2, ma'am. I can escort you." Autumn nodded, picked up the envelope and card, and exited the room without another word. The hallway felt colder now, the sterile air more noticeable against her skin. The agent trailed behind her, radioing quietly as they made their way to the baggage level. When they arrived, the carousel was empty. In the corner, her canvas tote had been placed next to a steel bin with a yellow tag attached. "Unverified item, limited access." She picked it up, wordlessly. A zipper had been pulled halfway open. She checked the folder inside. Pages slightly bent, not missing, but touched. She looked at the agent. "Was this opened?" I don't know, ma'am. It shouldn't have been." She zipped the tote and slung it over her shoulder. "Get your supervisor," she said. "Now." He nodded and stepped away. Autumn turned to face the far wall, where a thin window showed the edge of the runway. Planes took off every 3 minutes. Everything outside looked orderly, but the real turbulence had already started beneath the surface, between the lines, behind the smiling service grips and ma'ams that hid the truth of what people thought they were allowed to control. She knew she couldn't fix the system in one flight. But she also knew the hallway outside the baggage area was lined with industrial gray walls, fluorescent lighting that flickered ever so slightly, and the faint scent of cleaning chemicals that clung to the air like residue from too many apologies. Autumn stood alone, with her tote over her shoulder, her fingers gripping the strap tighter than she realized. Her breath was even, but her mind was no longer calm. It was focused. She heard footsteps before she saw the man. He turned the corner briskly, wearing a tailored navy suit and a silver name badge that read, "Marcus, Zone Manager." He extended a hand, but Autumn didn't take it. She simply gave him a look, not hostile, but uninviting, and said, "You opened my bag." Eric's smile faltered, then returned with a professional gloss. "We had to ensure the item inside wasn't a safety concern." "A sealed envelope marked with a legal insignia," she replied. That was your safety risk. Eric gestured toward a nearby private room. Would you mind stepping in so we can clarify a few matters? Autumn didn't move. You mean so you can control the conversation in private? He blinked, then cleared his throat. Our system flagged you as a behavioral concern. Because I refused to change seats? Autumn asked, her voice low, steady, and sharp. Eric hesitated. We received a report that your demeanor toward cabin crew was measured. Non-compliant? Potentially confrontational, he finished. Protocol requires we note such cases for future travel records. Autumn stepped closer, her eyes locked onto his. You're trying to rewrite the facts, she said. Not because I was aggressive, but because I didn't yield. Eric looked over her shoulder, scanning the hallway like he wanted an exit from this conversation more than a resolution. Look, Ms. Riley, we can file an incident summary, or let this pass, but I do recommend we de-escalate. Autumn's laugh was soft, nearly silent. That's the word you all love, isn't it? De-escalate? You create the escalation, then frame my reaction as the problem. Eric straightened, eyes narrowing slightly. If you're unsatisfied with how this was handled, you can submit a grievance through our guest relations team. Autumn's expression didn't change. You mean the same department that filed a false report 5 minutes after I landed? Eric didn't answer. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he glanced at it before muttering, "Excuse me," and walking away with a speed that betrayed urgency. Autumn watched him turn the corner and disappear into another corridor. She exhaled slowly, then turned to find a seat in the corner of the waiting area. The room was mostly empty, just a few ground staff passing through, and an older man cleaning the floor with a wide mop. She sat, placed her tote in her lap, and pulled out the folder again. The edges were now bent. Someone had flipped through it, probably not even with interest. Just with the entitled carelessness of someone who assumed nothing inside could matter because of who it belonged to. That was the part that always stung more than the act itself. The certainty they carried that nothing she held could be worth more than what they assumed about her. She pulled out her phone and opened the secure app linked to the trustee portal. Her fingerprint unlocked the encryption, and within seconds, she was reviewing a list of flagged personnel IDs across multiple airport zones, submitted through anonymous audit reports. Her name appeared once under non-cooperative passenger. Beneath it, a code 37C. She tapped into the report. It was sparse, almost deliberately vague. Subject questioned authority, refused cabin instructions, escalated verbal tone, declined relocation, withheld personal documentation. None of it was true. All of it was just enough to justify the treatment. Not punishment, not even discipline, just exclusion. She closed the app and leaned back, letting her head rest against the cold wall behind her. The overhead speaker called out names for baggage claim assistants and paging agents. No one called hers. No one needed to. She wasn't meant to be served here. She was meant to be erased. Silently. The strategy wasn't confrontation. It was corrosion. Bit by bit, they chipped at the perception of her value. Not with slurs or shouting, but with withheld towels, silent menus, misfiled flags, and cold fish. They hadn't screamed that she didn't belong. They just wanted her to doubt that she ever did. The double doors to her right opened, and a man in a neon vest walked in with a clipboard. "Naomi Carter?" he asked. She nodded. "We recovered your personal item," he said, holding up a familiar document pouch. "This one unsealed. It was found near a janitorial station," he added, Probably fell during transfer. Autumn didn't move. It didn't fall, she said quietly. It was taken. The man blinked, clearly confused, then placed the pouch on the table. There's no way to prove that, ma'am. It wasn't logged in. Exactly, Autumn replied, standing. She opened the pouch. Nothing was missing, but the final page of the contract now had a crease across the signature line, as if someone had folded it without care. She smoothed it carefully, placed it back inside, and looked up. Outside the room's narrow window, she could see 2 flight attendants walking past. One of them was Sloane. She wasn't smiling now. She was mid-conversation, animated, likely recounting the same version of the story they always told the difficult passenger, the disrupted process, the protocols followed to the letter. Autumn watched her for a moment, not with anger, not even with satisfaction, but with that same silence they had used to erase her. Only now, she was the one holding it, and silence, in the right hands, was far louder than a voice raised in protest. She walked out of the room and back into the terminal. The gate where she had arrived was now boarding a new flight. A different gate agent was scanning tickets, laughing with a group of well-dressed passengers. Autumn passed unnoticed, until she didn't. A voice from behind. Naomi Carter, hold on. We need to speak with you before you... Autumn returned to the aisle with the quiet precision of someone who had no intention of making a scene, but refused to shrink beneath one. Her second trip to the lavatory was uneventful. No stumbling, no delays, just a simple necessity after hours in flight. But the moment she stepped back into the aisle and reached her seat, Sloane reappeared, her smile gone, her tone clipped with a kind of artificial calm that usually precedes a reprimand. Ms. Riley, she said, just loud enough for the surrounding rows to hear. We'd appreciate it if you remained seated for the remainder of the flight. Multiple movements in the cabin can unsettle other passengers. Autumn looked at her without blinking. Is there a policy against using the restroom more than once? Sloane hesitated, choosing her words. Of course not, she said. But certain behaviors can be misinterpreted. Standing frequently in flight, lingering near crew stations, it gives the wrong impression. To whom? Autumn asked, her voice firm but never raised. Sloane smiled thinly. Let's just say it's better to err on the side of consistency. Autumn didn't reply. She sat down, buckled her belt, and stared out the window as the aircraft began its initial descent into the city. The seatbelt light chimed. Flight attendants prepared for landing. The final cabin announcements echoed overhead, masked in professional neutrality. But as the plane taxied toward the gate, Autumn noticed the shift in posture among the crew. Sloane kept glancing toward the front. Another flight attendant exchanged a look with her near the galley. A brief nod, followed by a murmured comment into a headset. Autumn's jaw tensed. She knew that language. It was procedural, not personal. That made it worse. Protocol didn't need malice to cause harm. It just needed permission. And here, it had been given freely. When the plane reached the gate, the chime for seat release barely had time to sound before 2 uniformed figures stepped into the cabin. They weren't police, not technically, but they wore the badge of airport security, a different flavor of control, more discreet, but no less absolute. They moved with practiced ease, scanning the first rows as if reading a checklist, stopping directly at row 2. Ms. Riley, the taller one asked, eyes professional but not unkind. We'd like you to step off with us. Just a few things to verify. Autumn didn't move immediately. Is there a problem with my travel documents? She asked. No, ma'am? The second officer answered. We've been asked to follow up on a passenger report. It's a quick process. What kind of report? She asked again, her tone unshaken. Concerns were raised regarding in-flight behavior. The first said, specifically movement during secure cabin phases, reluctance to comply with seat directives, and interactions perceived as confrontational. Autumn stood slowly. So, I'm being detained for walking to the bathroom and refusing to be ignored. No one's being detained, the officer replied. We're just conducting a soft screening. The language was deliberate, designed to sound benign. Autumn knew better. She turned to retrieve her tote from under the seat, noting that Sloane was watching her with an expression that feigned concern, but lacked regret. The other passengers pretended not to notice, though a few glanced over their shoulders, trying to look casual while recording the moment with their eyes. Autumn slung the tote over her shoulder, pressed the envelope flat against her side, and followed the two officers down the aisle and out of the aircraft. The jet bridge was quiet, except for the echo of their footsteps. Outside the terminal, lights glared, fluorescent white through the observation windows. One officer stayed slightly ahead, the other at her side. No cuffs, no force, just a gentle ushering through space designed to feel polite while still asserting control. They stopped near a service door beside a cleaning station. This way, one said, opening it to reveal a private corridor flanked by gray walls and signage that only employees normally saw. At the end was a small room with frosted glass, 2 chairs, and a desk. A woman in a blazer was already seated inside, typing into a monitor. She looked up as they entered. Ms. Riley, I'm Officer Jasmine, liaison for post-arrival compliance. May I see your identification? Autumn reached into her bag and handed over her state-issued ID and boarding pass. Reyes scanned them both, her fingers moving across the keyboard, eyes flicking back and forth as a screen loaded. We have a note here. Logged by flight staff. Not a formal report. Just an internal flag, said Reyes. You expressed resistance to cabin protocol, and that your conduct caused discomfort to surrounding passengers. Autumn leaned forward slightly. Did they list which passengers? No, ma'am, Reyes said. And for privacy reasons, they're not required to. So, the accusation is anonymous, Autumn said. And I have no chance to respond to it before being pulled into a holding room. Reyes paused. It's not a holding room, ma'am. It's a courtesy screening location. Autumn smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Language is impressive, she said. You've made this sound like hospitality? Reyes didn't answer. The door opened again. A man stepped in. Early 40s, suit without a tie, holding a folder and a tired expression. Ms. Riley, he said. I'm Thomas, with guest operations oversight. I reviewed the incident log and would like to clarify a few entries with you directly. Incident, Autumn asked. I used the lavatory and declined a cold meal. Jennings nodded, clearly uncomfortable. Yes, I believe that's where the note stems from, but the language used in the report raised certain automatic protocols. Words like uncooperative and verbal challenge trigger a level of scrutiny. Autumn stared at him. So your system punishes tone, not actions. He hesitated. It evaluates signals. And does the system log the signals of staff who ignore, exclude, or humiliate? Jennings didn't respond. Did your system log that my tray was deliberately served late? That my seat assignment was challenged mid-flight? Or that I was told my presence unsettled other passengers? There's no note of that, he said quietly. Autumn reached into her tote and withdrew the envelope again. She didn't open it, just placed it on the table like a silent declaration. This document has the power to affect every contract your airline holds with 3 regional financial firms, she said. I suggest you stop reading signals and start reading facts. Jennings looked down at the envelope. Reyes looked between them. The air inside the room had changed again, slightly denser, like the pause before a storm. Autumn crossed her legs slowly, deliberately, her tone cool and clear. You've pulled the wrong person off the plane. Autumn didn't move for a long moment after her final sentence. The envelope remained on the desk like a quiet threat, but her voice carried no aggression, no panic, no plea. It was measured, grounded in something more unsettling than anger. Authority. Jennings glanced at Officer Reyes, who kept her expression neutral but clearly alert. No one in the room dared speak first. Autumn let the silence settle before she slowly reached into the inner lining of her tote bag and withdrew a second envelope, smaller than the first, sealed with a red wax insignia that shimmered faintly under the fluorescent lights. She placed it carefully beside the original document. This, she said, tapping it with one manicured finger, is a signed legal directive from the Eason Trust Governance Board. It grants full discretionary override to any asset interference, including personal detainment, document access, or behavioral classification logged under false procedural claims. Jennings blinked. I'm sorry. East Trust. Autumn's eyes met his. You know the name? She said. Your airline's second largest stakeholder knows it better. Read carefully before touching me again. Officer Reyes leaned in slightly, scanning the seal, but making no move to take it. Jennings hesitated, then gently picked up the envelope and inspected the insignia. His eyes narrowing when he saw the micro-stamped serial code pressed into the wax. Is this active? He asked. As of this morning? Autumn replied. The moment your cabin crew attempted to reclassify my behavior, the directive became valid. Jennings carefully placed the envelope back down, adjusting it like it was something sacred or explosive. He pulled out his phone, typed rapidly, then looked at Reyes. Can you notify Terminal Command? We may need to suspend further engagement here? Reyes nodded and stepped out of the room without a word. Autumn leaned back in her chair. I assume you've already logged me under your internal incident system? She said. Whatever code you used, 37C, 82B, it won't hold. In fact, as of now, your entire regional system is being reviewed for how that code gets assigned. Pattern mapping, demographic correlation, profile history by personnel. Jennings rubbed his temples. That's handled through a separate channel. And that channel, Autumn replied, now has my digital signature authorizing external audit access. Her phone, still on silent, vibrated once. She unlocked it, tapped a single app, then turned the screen toward him. A message blinked at the top directive relay active. Override status confirmed by Trust Command. Jennings swallowed hard. This goes beyond this airport, he murmured. Yes, Autumn said calmly. It goes wherever the pattern does. Just then, the hallway outside erupted with a buzz of motion footsteps, voices, a phone ringing too long. Then the door cracked open again, and Officer Reyes returned. Her face, now markedly different, not stoic, but taut with tension. Behind her was a second officer. This one, older, clearly higher ranking, wearing a communication earpiece and holding a clipboard he hadn't bothered to look at. Ma'am, he said directly to Autumn. We've just received an urgent notification from our airline's central legal department. You are to be released immediately, without further questioning. All pending classifications have been suspended, effective retroactively. Jennings stood. Who authorized that? The man didn't blink. Executive Legal, with a parallel note issued to the Regional VP of Security. It says, he looked down briefly, reading, cease all operational interactions with passenger Naomi Carter. She is currently under corporate-level protection and engaged in an active fiduciary role. Autumn didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply rose from her chair with quiet precision and reached for her envelope. The officer took a step back to clear the way. Jennings stared at her, his voice struggling to catch up to the moment. I didn't know. You didn't ask, Autumn replied. And that's the root of it, isn't it? He opened his mouth again, but found nothing worth saying. Autumn turned to Reyes. I assume I'm free to re-enter the terminal. Of course, ma'am, she said quickly. Would you like an escort? No, Autumn said. I'd like distance. She stepped past them, her movements slow but firm, and opened the door herself. Outside, the corridor was no longer empty. 2 airport administrators were already huddled near the security office door, whispering into phones. One of them made eye contact with Autumn and immediately stepped aside. She walked past them without a word. Her heels clicked softly on the tile floor, a calm metronome in the chaos now starting to ripple through the terminal's back-end systems. Within seconds, her name was being removed from a dozen internal watch lists. Automated notices were called before they could reach local teams. A global compliance ping had been issued, red flagging any further action taken against her without direct clearance from the executive board. As Autumn rounded the corner toward the main concourse, she noticed a ripple in body language near Gate Z. Uniformed staff moved with erratic urgency. A woman in a blazer was whispering into a headset near the check-in podium. Someone else typed furiously into a control panel behind the counter. Every motion told her the same thing. The system had caught up to her identity, and now it was trying to reverse what it had already done, desperately rewriting its own behavior in real time. She stopped near a digital service kiosk, pulled up her reservation, and watched as her original first-class ticket reappeared, complete with priority status and updated access to every lounge in the terminal. Her name had been cleared, but the stain wasn't on her. It was on them. Behind her. Another voice rose from the boarding area. Wait, wasn't she the one they pulled from the flight earlier? A passenger asked. Yeah. Someone else replied. Now they're fixing her seat. Autumn didn't look back. She didn't need to. She stepped forward, her presence now setting the rhythm, not disrupting it. And as her phone lit up with a new encrypted message marked Confidential Compliance Response Activated, she reached into her tote one last time. Autumn pulled the small, hard-sided case from her tote and unlocked it with her fingerprint as she walked, her steps unhurried, each movement deliberate and composed. Inside was a secure mobile terminal, lightweight but high encryption, something not found in retail or business class, the kind issued only to fiduciary agents of high-tier investment trusts. She powered it on with a brief scan and began the sequence with practiced ease, her thumb authorizing a silent trigger that would notify the Genesis financial transaction monitoring system that she had confirmed identity activation. Within seconds, the system responded. Green light pulsing on the corner of the screen. Stakeholder ID 9903A recognized. Transactional authority unlocked. Autumn didn't smile. She didn't need to. That response was not just verification. It was a digital signature of power. At that exact moment, across the city, in a conference room cloaked in morning light and financial tension, 3 executives from Havenport's acquisition committee stared at the blinking notification on their dashboard. Trust Executive Contact activated. Genesis Financial Holding Transfer Authority, ARR. They all knew what it meant. The transaction, the $4.1 billion merger that would restructure regional ownership of the airline, required the signature of the last living heir to the Genesis founder's estate. A signature they had not expected to be invoked until final compliance meetings the following quarter. That heir was Naomi Carter. She walked past the VIP lounge checkpoint with the same expression she'd carried all morning, unreadable, steady. But now, every scanner she passed recognized her credentials with silent priority. No more blinking red screens. No more confusion or pause. Each system responded before she touched it. The assistant at the gate glanced at his tablet and straightened instantly. "Ms. Riley, would you like a private suite or boardroom access?" he asked, without waiting to be prompted. Autumn replied, "No, just open a terminal and connect me to your compliance officer." "Full access," he nodded, already tapping. Behind her, the whispers began again, this time from those who had previously judged her silence as weakness. "Wait, she's who?" Someone murmured. "I thought she was just a regular passenger." But that phrase, "just a passenger," had no weight anymore. The security breach, the flags, the document tampering, the accusations of being a problem. They weren't just violations, they were now financial liabilities, and the person they had underestimated was no longer anonymous. Autumn was the final verifier of a transaction that, if not signed within 72 hours, would nullify an exclusive rights clause Havenport had been lobbying for since Q1. The problem wasn't just that she had power, it was that the airline had treated her like she had none. At 9:04 a.m., a call was placed directly from Genesis HQ to Havenport's legal department. The voice on the line was precise, clipped, and male. "We understand Ms. Naomi Carter was subjected to improper behavioral classification under your passenger tracking system. As of this call, Genesis Financial Holdings is halting all forward momentum on the capital alignment package until an internal risk memo is submitted with accountability findings. Additionally, we are confirming she is the primary voting shareholder on the silent stake under Genesis's trust umbrella." The line went dead before questions could be asked. In the background, one of the airline's senior financial officers dropped his pen. "She's the one we were told would never surface in person," he muttered. Her stake was protected under 10 levels of anonymity. "Until it wasn't," the general counsel replied, grimly. In the terminal, Autumn received the notification she'd expected. "Risk status override confirmed. Genesis holding sync request pending signature." She tapped to defer it. Not yet. Not here. First, she wanted to see if they'd move on their own. Her phone buzzed again, this time with an encrypted ID she recognized. L. Westbrook, Director of Strategic Affairs, Havenport Air. She declined the call. Let them feel the weight of unavailability. The same weight they had pressed against her presence all morning. She walked slowly to the East Terminal Lounge, where senior operations met during merger periods, passed the biometric check without stopping, and entered the glass panel boardroom. Inside, 3 people sat waiting, none of them speaking, all of them pretending they hadn't been monitoring her location from the moment her name re-entered the system. The man at the center, Richard Blake himself, stood first, trying to summon charm that had never worked on women like Autumn. "Ms. Riley," he said carefully, "thank you for coming in. We deeply regret what happened this morning. We want to make it right." She sat without invitation, laid the folder gently on the table, and opened it, not to negotiate, but to show them their own future. "What happened wasn't a mistake," she said. "It was a mirror. You built a system that reflects the bias of those who operate it. I simply gave it a face you didn't expect." Leonard leaned forward, his expression tight. "We had no knowledge of your travel today. If we had known, you would have treated me differently?" Autumn finished. "Exactly, and that's the problem." No one interrupted her now. No one dared. She pulled out a second document, one marked with a Genesis Holdings watermark, signed by 3 trust administrators. "This is the conditional hold on our asset absorption plan. Unless reversed by close of business today, your fiscal quarter collapses, our partners will pull their hedges. The stock dips before the end of the week." Leonard's throat moved as he swallowed. "And your signature decides that?" "Yes," Autumn said. "And so far, I see no reason to give it." Behind her, the screen on the wall blinked with a notification. "Incoming update from Audit Logistics. First flagged entity Havenport Domestic Staff Division, Terminal C." Autumn tapped her tablet and opened the alert. The alert on Autumn's tablet blinked twice before expanding into a live feed dashboard. Not just a static report, but an active incident trace connected to the internal surveillance systems embedded in Terminal C and the aircraft cabin of Flight 447. The audit program, activated silently at her command 15 minutes earlier, had already pulled data from gate logs, crew communications, scanner records, and onboard cameras. The footage loaded quickly. Sloan bypassing her row during towel service, laughing quietly after her conversation with a passenger from row 5, speaking into her wrist mic moments before Autumn was flagged for movement. The footage didn't accuse. It confirmed. In another panel, the check-in supervisor who had redirected Autumn toward the economy line was seen glancing at her name, then waving off her boarding pass without scanning it, a move logged by the scanner's inactivity reading. None of them knew at the time that the system was watching, just as surely as they were watching her. But now, those eyes reported not to them, but to her. Across the airport, in the administrative wing, a phone rang on the desk of Karen Matthews, the head of Personnel Ethics and Protocol Enforcement. She answered on the second ring, already bracing for the conversation. "Yes," she said, listening for exactly 6 seconds before standing abruptly. "Who?" she asked. She's who the voice on the other end gave the answer she never expected. Genesis. Lisa didn't ask anything else. She grabbed her folder, left her desk, and sent the first alert. "Immediate compliance review. All staff assigned to Flight 447 report to Ops Room 6A in full uniform." At Gate C12, Sloan was mid-shift and adjusting the jet bridge assignment for an outbound flight when her wrist mic buzzed. "Heather, report to Admin Wing, Code Priority Level 3. She blinked, confused, then looked up to find a floor manager already walking toward her. "Now," he said firmly. "Bring your logbook." She followed without protest, though her heart had already started to pound. Elsewhere, Trent, the check-in supervisor who had redirected Autumn without scanning her pass, was halfway through rerouting an international transfer when his badge access locked him out of the screen. A red box popped up, restricted pending compliance investigation. Seconds later, a call came in through the wall phone next to him. The manager on the other end gave no greeting. "Ops Room 6A, bring your gate activity record. You're being pulled mid-shift." Within 30 minutes, the entire cabin crew of Flight 447 sat in a closed-door operations room under fluorescent lights that seemed sharper than usual, like they too were tuned for scrutiny. None of them had been told exactly why they were there, but the presence of a compliance officer, 2 HR leads, and an IT forensic specialist said more than enough. At the front of the room, Lisa stood with her arms folded, face unreadable. "We've initiated a Class B incident review," she began. "This concerns discriminatory profiling and protocol violations tied to a passenger traveling under identity-protected status. That passenger has since been identified as a strategic stakeholder in current acquisition proceedings." The room went still. Sloane's eyes darted toward her colleagues. Trent leaned back in his chair, jaw tightening. One of the flight attendants muttered, "Wait, she was a stakeholder." Lisa's voice cut back in. "Not just a stakeholder. The stakeholder? Genesis Financial's sole discretionary signatory. Every interaction you had with her is currently being reviewed on synced video logs." The screen behind Lisa came to life, playing back a muted sequence of moments from the flight Sloane skipping Autumn's towel. The moment she whispered near the galley, the clip of her trying to relocate Autumn under the pretense of weight balance. Each one dated, time-stamped, cross-referenced with service logs and seating assignments. Then the voice comms, recorded internal chatter, where terms like confusing guest, probably upgraded on points, and not a first-class fit were casually exchanged between staff on a closed-loop channel. "These are not errors in service," Lisa said. "These are behavioral trends." Trent stood abruptly. "Nobody told us who she was." Lisa's reply was immediate. "That's the point. You're not supposed to need to know." Another clip played. This time at the gate, Trent holding Autumn's boarding pass in hand, glancing once, then handing it back without scanning. That act triggered her profile flag. The IT specialist added, "Your override froze her access and set off the compliance ping. She was traveling under protected identity status. Your failure to validate her pass activated the manual review protocol you tried to use against her." Trent opened his mouth again, but Lisa wasn't finished. "And you didn't stop there. Your incident notes were escalated to Central without proper approval. That's breach of chain of command and falsification of behavior classification." The room was silent again. This time not from confusion, but from dread. The kind of dread that came when people who had confidently dismissed someone realized that the person they targeted wasn't vulnerable, but vital. "Effective immediately," Lisa said. "Gate Supervisor Logan is suspended, pending investigation." Trent's face flushed red. "You can't suspend me without union." "The union has been notified," she interrupted, "and they've deferred their initial statement until after they've seen the audit." She turned to Sloane next. "Senior Flight Attendant Heather, removed from flight rotation, effective immediately. Your communication logs are under internal ethics review. The rest of you are on hold, pending evaluation." No one moved, no one protested, because what played behind them wasn't a threat. It was a record, the kind that didn't scream. It just played everything back quietly, so that no one could deny what they had seen. Outside the room, a printer buzzed as the preliminary investigation findings were distributed to the legal department. And down the hall, an assistant typed a message into the CEO's inbox. "Subject emergency review, stakeholder incident, immediate board briefing required." Meanwhile, in the lounge, Autumn watched the screen update again. The memo went out quietly, at 2:42 p.m. Not through a press conference, not through a disciplinary bulletin, but as a flight roster update buried inside the airline's internal scheduling portal. The subject line read, "Crew realignment, immediate operational shift." The names listed included every staff member from Flight 447 from cabin lead to support attendants, and each had been reassigned to domestic short-haul routes with limited passenger class. No premium tier, no international status, and certainly no exposure to executive clientele. The company hadn't used the word demotion, But the message was unmistakable. First-class privileges rescinded, overseas rotation suspended, due to a pending ethics evaluation. The footnote read, "These assignments reflect a temporary shift in alignment, pending cultural retraining." But everyone reading the list knew better. This wasn't a shift. It was a fall. Not enough to terminate, just enough to remind them what they lost. Enough to make them feel it. Every morning, they reported to regional gates, to crowded cabins and budget layouts, to passengers who wouldn't ask for infused towels or custom meal plating because they'd never had them. To begin with, enough to show them that power can be silent and still absolute. Sloane read the memo on her break, sitting in the employee lounge near the far side of Terminal F, where regional crew gathered before boarding, her uniform still crisp, her posture still trained. But the absence of confidence in her expression betrayed the truth. She wasn't furious. She was stunned. Somewhere deep inside, she must have believed it wouldn't come to this. That the woman she dismissed would vanish or accept or forgive. That her actions would be folded neatly into policy, just like they always had. But that didn't happen, because this time, the passenger had been someone who didn't need to shout to be heard. She only had to wait long enough for the system to hear itself. Autumn didn't seek her out. She didn't need confrontation. But as fate, or perhaps consequence, would have it, their paths crossed one final time as Sloane walked toward Gate B8 for her first reassigned flight to Milwaukee. Autumn, now finishing a call by the private concierge counter, noticed the uniform first, then the woman in it. She didn't stare. She didn't pause. But as Sloane passed within 3 feet of her, their eyes met, and in that sliver of shared air, 1,000 unsaid things pulled tight. Sloane slowed, not fully stopping, but enough to acknowledge the moment. Autumn stepped forward, not fast, not aggressive, just with the kind of presence that commands space by existing in it fully. "You said something to me earlier," Autumn said, voice low, measured, unshaken. "On the plane." Sloane blinked once. You said I didn't fit in first class?" Autumn continued. Then, "I looked out of place." Sloane swallowed hard, her throat bobbing slightly. "I didn't mean—" "You were right," Autumn said, her tone not angry but resolute. "I don't fit in first class." Sloane blinked, confused. Then Autumn finished, her voice softer, like a razor beneath silk. "I came here to buy it." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They landed in the quiet space between them with more impact than a shouted accusation ever could. Sloane didn't reply. She couldn't. She simply stood there, every protocol she'd memorized now worthless. Autumn didn't wait for a response. She turned, gathered her case, and walked toward the terminal's northern wing, where a private exit led to executive transport. She didn't need a boarding group. She wasn't catching a flight. She was preparing for the next boardroom. Behind her, Sloane watched her go, her arms stiff at her sides, mouth slightly open, like the apology she'd been preparing suddenly had nowhere to go. The terminal bustled around her, oblivious, indifferent. But to Sloane, the silence left behind by Autumn said everything. Not through yelling, not through scandal, but through structure, through consequence, through the fact that starting today, the woman she tried to displace now shaped the routes she could no longer fly. Upstairs, in the executive offices overlooking runway 2R, a meeting was underway. The boardroom blinds were partially drawn, but the figures inside were clearly unsettled. Several spoke into phones. Others read from printed briefing packets marked Confidential Stakeholder Incident Review, Level 1 Sensitivity. At the head of the table, the CEO of Havenport sat, pale and unspeaking, as an assistant placed two final documents in front of him. One was a summary of the internal investigation. The other was a one-line email from Genesis Holdings. Stakeholder Naomi Carter has opted to proceed with merger conditions under revised compliance requirements. Enforcement of all terms is effective immediately. No drama, no speech, just the full weight of justice arriving like a late flight inevitable, final, and echoing quietly down every corridor it passed. If this story made you pause, think, or feel something deeper, don't forget to like and subscribe for more powerful narratives that challenge what we accept as normal. What moment hit you the hardest? Was there a turning point you didn't see coming? And most importantly, where in the world are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. Your perspective matters.